You've been feeling like a stranger in your own life. You wake up and go through the motion, but something is off. People still see you smiling. You still respond to messages, show up to work, make conversation when needed, but none of it feels real and the colors have faded. The voices around you echo, but they don't reach your heart. It's not that something terrible happened. It's worse. Nothing happened. It's just that you don't recognize yourself anymore. And what's terrifying is that you're not sure when it started. Maybe it began the day you stopped being excited about things you used to love. Or when you found yourself surrounded by people and still felt alone. Or maybe it was the quiet tears you cried at night. Not out of pain, but out of emptiness. The kind of tears that don't make noise. The ones even you don't understand. That's the kind of lost we're talking about. The kind of lost that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but eats you alive from the inside. But what if I told you you're not lost at all? What if I told you that what you're feeling isn't a detour, but a direction? You're not drifting. You're being drawn, slowly, silently, into a place that isn't on any map. A place where the noise of the world starts to fade just enough for you to finally hear something else, something ancient, something divine. You're in the desert, not a desert of punishment, but of preparation. And I know that word alone can sound harsh. A desert is dry, lonely, empty. It's the kind of place most people avoid. But there's something about the desert that you can't get anywhere else. It's where the distractions die, where the applause stops, where the masks fall. And in that stillness, something sacred happens. God begins to whisper. You see, there's a verse buried in the quiet corners of Scripture, Hosea 2:14. Therefore, I will allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. It's not about exile. It's about intimacy. God doesn't push you away to punish you. He pulls you aside to prepare you. When God wants to speak to your heart, He first removes the noise from your ears. But the process hurts. It hurts because you don't realize what's happening. It feels like rejection, like failure, like silence. And our minds, trained to fear stillness, interpret it as abandonment. We ask, why me? What did I do wrong? Why is everyone else moving forward while I feel stuck in place? But maybe you're not stuck. Maybe you're being hidden. There are seasons when God hides you, not because you're unworthy, but because you're not ready to be seen. Because exposure too early can destroy what was meant to grow in the dark. Think of seeds. Think of how they must first go underground, in silence and in darkness, before they ever see light. No one claps for a seed buried in dirt. But without that burial, there is no life. In the same way, maybe your silence is sacred. Maybe your not knowing is God creating space for something you can't yet name. Maybe the disconnection you feel isn't a breakdown, but a breakthrough that hasn't surfaced yet. People rarely talk about the spiritual purpose of feeling lost, of being disoriented. But look at every great figure who did something meaningful with their life. Moses, Elijah, David, even Jesus. Each of them had a wilderness, a season of nothingness, a phase where they felt hidden, misunderstood, out of place. And it was in those moments that God did His deepest work. You are not an exception. You are not forgotten. You are being found, not by people, not by success, not by validation, but by the one who created you. God isn't looking for your performance. He's looking for your permission to come close in the stillness and speak to the version of you that's too exhausted to keep pretending. That's why everything had to slow down. That's why the doors closed. That's why the plans didn't work. Because what He wants to show you can't be taught in a crowd. It must be revealed in solitude. And yes, it's terrifying, but it's also sacred. Because in the place where you feel the most alone, you're actually being seen the most. God doesn't shout in storms. He whispers in stillness. And that stillness you're drowning in, it's the exact place He chose to meet you. Because He knows that your heart, though tired, is open. That your spirit, though confused, is still listening. That your soul, though bruised, is still reaching. This isn't punishment. This is preservation. He's keeping you from things that would have broken you, from people who would have praised the version of you that was never real, from paths that would have led you further away from who you're becoming. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are being built. And while no one may understand your process, heaven has already written your outcome. So breathe. You are not lost. You are being found in the only place that truly matters, where only God can find you. There's a strange kind of silence that follows spiritual isolation. It doesn't roar. It lingers. It wraps itself around you in the middle of the night when everyone else is asleep, when the world is quiet, and all you can hear is your own heartbeat asking questions that your mind is too tired to answer. You don't cry every night, but sometimes you lie there awake and wonder why your soul feels so heavy for no clear reason. It's not depression, not entirely. It's not sadness either. It's more like an ache that doesn't belong to this world, a longing that's deeper than emotion. It feels like your spirit is remembering something your body forgot, like a homesickness for a place you've never been, but know exists. And that feeling, that quiet grief, that's sacred ground, because only people who are being prepared for something eternal feel it that deeply. Only those who are chosen to carry something spiritual are broken in ways words can't explain. You've looked around for someone to understand you, someone to say, "I know that feeling too." But all you hear are surface-level replies, shallow advice, empty encouragements. They tell you to cheer up, stay positive, just move on. But you're not looking for a motivational quote. You're looking for something real, something that acknowledges the depth of what you're carrying. The truth is, no one around you was meant to understand this moment, because this moment wasn't meant to be shared. It was meant to be sacred. That's why God allowed the silence, the unanswered messages, the canceled plans, the loneliness. It wasn't abandonment, it was alignment. He was slowly removing the voices that distracted you from His, even the good ones, even the ones you loved. Because sometimes, clarity only comes when the noise disappears. You're not cursed. You're not forgotten. You're being calibrated, like a compass being reset to find true north again. You were surrounded by too many things that pulled you in too many directions. Now, you're being pulled inward, toward the place where your spirit meets its source. That's why everything external feels blurry, because the focus now is internal, not on who you appear to be, but on who you really are. This is not a breakdown. This is a breakthrough, but it's happening in secret, because heaven does its deepest work in hidden places. Think about the way God has always moved. Moses was called from a burning bush, alone. Elijah heard God's voice in a whisper, alone. Jesus began his ministry after 40 days in the wilderness, alone. Solitude is not a mistake in the plan. It is the plan. It is where you become who you were meant to be. But becoming is uncomfortable. It requires a stripping away of everything that kept you safe, even if it wasn't right. That version of you that knew all the answers, that kept it together, that smiled for the photos, that version had to go, because that version was surviving. And God didn't create you to survive. He created you to be fully alive, to feel, to break, to heal, to rise. And sometimes, that process means being taken to the very edge of yourself, to the point where all your plans fall apart, where your prayers sound more like questions than praise, where even your faith feels paper thin. That's where the transformation begins, not in the certainty, but in the surrender. The moment you admit, "God, I don't know what you're doing, but I trust you anyway." That's when the soil becomes fertile. That's when the roots begin to grow deeper. That's when the quiet becomes holy. And what's even more powerful, God is not waiting for you to be strong again. He's sitting with you in the weakness. He's not embarrassed by your confusion. He's not impatient with your tears. He collects them. He records them. Psalm 56:8 says, "You have kept count of my tossings. Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book?" That's the kind of God you serve, not a distant ruler, a present Father, a healer who knows that your soul isn't asking for quick fixes. It's asking to be seen, to be heard, to be held. And the holding doesn't happen in crowded rooms. It happens in quiet mornings, in long nights, in random moments when you're driving alone and suddenly feel like crying for no reason. That's not weakness. That's awakening. Your spirit is waking up to something deeper, something eternal, something divine. And even though it doesn't look like it, you're not behind. You're right on schedule, because this is not the end of your story. It's the part where everything changes, where old identities fall away, where wounds become wisdom, where silence becomes strength, where the voice of God begins to speak, not just to you, but through you. And what you're learning in this season will not be wasted. Every tear, every sleepless night, every question, it will all be used. Nothing in God's hands is ever meaningless. So let the silence come. Let the confusion rise. Let the stillness settle. Because you are not falling apart. You are being rebuilt. And soon, when the time is right, you'll look back and see it for what it truly was. Not the end, but the beginning of something sacred, something unshakable, something eternal. There's something sacred about hidden places, places where nothing makes sense to the world, but everything begins to make sense to your soul. That's where you are now. And while others might see your isolation as a season of loss, heaven sees it as a season of preparation. You're not invisible, you're being preserved. Because what God is about to birth through your life can't be rushed, it can't be contaminated, it can't be touched by hands that don't understand the weight of your calling. That's why people left. That's why opportunities fell through. That's why doors didn't open. Because you weren't being punished. You were being protected. Protected from premature exposure. Protected from places that couldn't handle the fullness of what you carry. Protected from being celebrated before you were healed. Healing takes time. Not because God is slow, but because restoration requires roots. Not shallow affirmation, deep rewiring. And that kind of work doesn't happen on stages. It happens in caves, in deserts, in places no one claps for you and no one sees you, but God does. And He isn't just watching, He's working. Right now, in this very moment, the Spirit of God is doing something within you that you may not fully understand, but you feel it. You feel the breaking. You feel the stretching. You feel the pulling away from everything you once leaned on. And it's terrifying, because the familiar, even when it's painful, can be comforting. But when God starts to remove your old anchors, it can feel like drowning until you realize you were never supposed to be anchored to people, plans, or positions. You were meant to be anchored in Him, only Him. That's why you're here. This wilderness is not a punishment, it's a reset. It's where idols are shattered, where false identities are stripped, where masks are removed. And yes, it hurts deeply, but pain is not the end. Numbness is, and you're not numb anymore. You're awake, aware, tender again. That tenderness is not weakness. It's a sign that you're being reshaped, sculpted, refined, like clay on the potter's wheel, being pressed and spun and molded into something that can hold glory. Not just blessings, not just success, but glory. And glory can't be carried by people who are full of themselves. It can only rest on the shoulders of those who have been emptied. Emptied of pride, emptied of self-reliance, emptied of the need to be understood, validated, or applauded. Emptied so you can be filled. This is the part no one sees in the testimony. The part before the breakthrough. The part before the redemption arc. The part where you question everything, even your own worth. But it's also the part that becomes the foundation for everything that comes after. Without this season, the next one would collapse, and God knows that. So He's letting it hurt. He's letting it feel like you're walking through fog. He's allowing the confusion, not to torture you, but to lead you. Because confusion forces you to stop relying on logic and start listening to the still, small voice that doesn't shout, but whisper. And that whisper is Him. It's the voice that says, I'm still with you, even when you feel lost, even when you feel forgotten, even when you feel like your prayers are hitting the ceiling. Because faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just breathing. Sometimes it's just getting out of bed. Sometimes it's just not giving up. And that is enough. Let me remind you of something sacred. Even Jesus had a moment where he felt forsaken. Hanging on the cross, with the weight of the world's sin crushing him, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27:46. If the Son of God experienced that depth of agony, then your pain is not invalid. Your silence is not a failure. It's part of the mystery, a mystery that leads to glory. You are walking through something eternal. This isn't about a career, or a relationship, or a status. This is about your soul, your destiny, your divine design. And God is jealous over it. He won't let it be rushed, diluted, or destroyed. That's why this moment feels so intense. Because something inside you is being reborn. Not polished, not edited, not upgraded, reborn. And rebirth is messy. It involves labor. It involves groaning. It involves shedding skin that no longer fits the soul that's emerging. But what comes after is beautiful. Not perfect, not pain-free, but beautiful in the way that broken things become sacred when they are surrendered. That's what you're doing now. Surrendering. Not giving up, but laying it down. Laying down the version of yourself that tried to control everything. Laying down the expectations that exhausted you. Laying down the false strength that kept you from healing. And in that laying down, you will rise. Not in pride, but in peace. Not in performance, but in presence. Because the most powerful people in the kingdom are not the ones who look the strongest. They're the ones who learned how to be still. Still in chaos. Still in grief. Still in confusion. And in that stillness, they heard him. So if all you can do right now is breathe, then breathe. If all you can do is whisper a tired prayer, then whisper it. If all you can do is sit in silence and feel your heart beat, then do that. Because God is not waiting for you to be impressive. He's waiting for you to be real. He's not afraid of your doubt. He's not angry at your exhaustion. He's right here, in the middle of your storm. He's not leaving. Because the place you feel lost is the very place he plans to meet you. You've survived what you never told anyone about. Not just pain, but confusion that couldn't be put into words. Moments where the silence in your soul was so loud you could barely hear your own thoughts. And yet, here you are, still standing, still breathing, still searching for something that feels like home. But let's be honest, the world around you has lost its flavor. The things that used to excite you now feel dull. Conversations feel shallow. Laughter feels distant. You try to connect, but something inside you knows that what you're looking for won't be found in people, places, or performances. And that's not a failure. It's a sign that your soul has outgrown the surface. You're not broken. You're awakening. It's a sacred ache, an inner pulling that feels like restlessness, but it's actually a divine invitation. You were never made to fit in. You were made to find, to dig, to hunger, to long for something more than this world can offer. This is why God sometimes allows everything familiar to unravel, because comfort can become a cage. And when the soul starts to stir, no routine, no crowd, no applause can satisfy it. The spiritual desert you're walking through isn't because you've lost your way. It's because you're being led away from distractions, from illusions, from everything that numbs what was meant to be felt. Real growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from holy discontent. And you're feeling it now. The discontent with shallow answers, empty rituals, half-hearted living. You want the real thing, real connection, real healing, real presence, not noise, not performance, just present. And here's the miracle. God is not offended by your longing. He created it. He designed the craving inside you to lead you to Him, not to religion, not to guilt, not to spiritual perfection, but to Him, the person, the voice, the heart that knows yours better than you ever could. You've been conditioned to believe that you have to be strong to be spiritual, that you need to have it all together, that faith looks like confidence. But sometimes, Faith looks like a whisper, a tear, a shaking hand still reaching out in the dark. And God sees that. He honors that. He leans in closer to that than to any performance we could put on. So if you're tired of pretending, you're in the right place. If you're done performing, you're finally ready to receive. Because you can't receive when your hands are busy holding up a mask. But when you let it fall, when you come to Him without the scripts, without the fake smiles, without the rehearsed prayers, something sacred happens. You stop being a project to fix, and you start becoming a person to love, a soul to hold, a heart to restore. You were never meant to be a soldier marching through spiritual battlefields with a smile glued to your face. You were meant to be a child, safe in the arms of a Father who isn't impressed by your strength, but moved by your surrender. That's where peace begins. Not when the storm ends, but when you realize you're not fighting it alone. The God who created the galaxies is sitting with you in your living room. The same hands that shaped mountains are the ones holding your heart. He's not waiting for your theology to be perfect. He's not testing your knowledge. He's listening to your sighs, collecting your tears, reading the prayers you don't know how to say. Psalm 56:8 says He keeps our tears in a bottle. Imagine that. Every tear you've cried, documented, collected, remembered, not one of them wasted, not one of them ignored. Because in God's economy, even your pain is valuable. Even your weakness is sacred. He doesn't throw broken things away. He transforms them. But here's the secret no one talks about. Transformation doesn't always feel good. It often feels like being undone, like losing parts of yourself you thought were essential, like having your heart rewritten in a language you don't fully understand yet. But trust this, every holy transformation begins with disorientation. God is not afraid to dismantle what you built without Him, not because He wants to punish you, but because He wants to give you something real, something eternal, something that doesn't collapse when life gets hard. That's what He's doing now. He's reteaching you how to walk, not on stages, but in the Spirit, not for validation, but for intimacy, not for applause, but for alignment. He's not trying to make you impressive. He's trying to make you whole. And wholeness comes from surrender. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind where you say, I don't know what you're doing, but I trust you anyway. The kind where you keep showing up, even when you don't feel anything. The kind where you choose stillness, even when the world screams for action. Because faith is not proven in how loud we shout. It's revealed in how deeply we rest. And when you finally rest, when you stop trying to earn love and just receive it, you'll begin to see the wilderness differently. Not as punishment, but as preparation. Not as rejection, but as redirection. Not as exile, but as encounter. This is where it all begins. In the quiet, in the hidden, in the places that feel like endings, but are actually sacred beginnings. Somewhere deep inside, you've always felt it. That quiet sense that your life wasn't meant to stay tangled in confusion, fear, or emptiness. That the wilderness around you wasn't chaos, but choreography. That the silence wasn't abandonment, but alignment. And now, slowly, like dawn breaking after a long, dark night, it's beginning to make sense. Because God doesn't rush healing. He's not in a hurry to fix you. He's interested in forming something within you that will last longer than emotion, longer than applause, longer than the opinions of others. He's crafting endurance. Not the kind that pushes through with gritted teeth, but the kind that trusts even when nothing makes sense. That kind of endurance doesn't come from knowledge. It comes from knowing Him. And the more time you spend in this quiet place, the more you'll begin to realize this isolation wasn't a punishment. It was an invitation, a sacred season, a personal sanctuary. This was the place where God could finally get you alone, away from the noise, the comparisons, the expectation, where your identity could be rooted in something deeper than what you do, what you have, or what you feel. It's here, in the silence, where you remember who you are, and even more, whose you are. In Hosea 2:14, God says, I will allure her, I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. Not shout, not lecture. Speak tenderly. Because the voice of God isn't a storm, it's a whisper. It doesn't dominate, it invites. It doesn't impose, it draws you near. And if your life has felt stripped lately, of clarity, of companionship, of certainty, then perhaps, like Israel, you're being led into your own wilderness. But what looks like a loss is often a layer being peeled back, so you can finally feel what you were too busy to notice before. God doesn't remove what's unnecessary to punish you. He removes what distracts you from intimacy, from clarity, from peace. The silence is sacred because it sharpens your senses. You begin to notice things others don't. Patterns, echoes. That moment when a verse you've read 1,000 times suddenly breathes life into a cracked part of your soul. That conversation that seemed casual but answered a question you whispered in tears the night before. That unexpected sense of calm in the middle of chaos, as if someone unseen is holding it all and holding you. This isn't random. This is divine orchestration. But make no mistake, the wilderness is not comfortable. It stretches you. It confronts you. It brings up what's been buried, the old identities that no longer fit, the fears you've tried to manage in silence, the insecurities masked by busyness. But it also reveals the eternal. It makes space for encounter. It strips away the false so that only truth remains. And the truth is, you are not forgotten. You are not disqualified. You are not too broken, too late, or too far gone. You are being rewritten, rewired, reclaimed. God is taking what the world overlooked and calling it holy. He's turning your desert into a garden, your cries into prayers, your wounds into wells of wisdom. You don't need to rush this process. You don't need to prove your growth. You don't even need to understand it all. You only need to remain, to let Him speak, to let yourself listen, to let the stillness form something the noise never could. So breathe, really breathe. You're not behind, you're not lost. You're exactly where you need to be to hear the voice that matters most. And when you come out of this place, because you will, you won't come out the same. You'll carry something different. A peace that doesn't shake with circumstances. A confidence that doesn't need to be loud. A purpose that's no longer borrowed from the world's applause, but born from God's presence. And maybe, just maybe, the reason you were set apart for a while was because you were being prepared to walk in something greater than what you were praying for. Maybe the delay wasn't a denial, but a protection. Maybe the detour wasn't random, but divine. Maybe the darkness wasn't a void, but a womb. And maybe, just maybe, what looked like an ending was really the beginning of something so much bigger than you could have imagined. So if you've ever wondered why you were pulled away from what was familiar, if you've ever felt like life didn't make sense anymore, if you've ever found yourself sitting in a quiet room, aching for clarity, longing for meaning, and hoping, just hoping, that there was more to this story, then hear this now. You're not forgotten. You're being found. You're not being hidden. You're being healed. You're not being punished. You're being positioned. And the one who called you into the wilderness will not leave you in it. He's already there, speaking, guiding, transforming. And when the time is right, you'll emerge with fire in your eyes, truth in your bones, and the kind of peace that can only be forged in silence. Because you were never really lost. You were just being led. And now you're ready to live like someone who's been found.